Kung dumaan kayo sa tapat ng simbahan, marahil napansin ninyo na merong road repair works. Nagdidrill sila, kaya maalikabok. And I'm sure, kung kumapit yung alikabok sa katawan ninyo, bago kayo pumasok sa simbahan, pinagpag nyo muna. Ayaw nating nakakapitan ng alikabok. Pero sa araw na ito, kayo'y lalagyan ng alikabok at hindi nyo papagpagin. Pag naulingan yung tao, uhugasan niya. Pero sa araw na ito, uulingan kayo at hindi nyo huhugasan. Ano ba to? It is a ritual that we are doing every year on Ash Wednesday. Pinapagpag ang alikabok, hinuhugasan ng uling. Kasi dumi ang tingin natin yan. Madudumihan ka. Pero sa araw na ito, nilalagay natin sa ulo natin at isinisigaw natin sa mundo. Wala akong dapat ipagmalinis. Madumi din ako. I am unclean. This is what we proclaim when we join the ritual of Ash Wednesday. And so today, we enter again into a season of penance and fasting. And we're called upon by our readings to humble ourselves before God and before one another. We have ashes imposed on our heads. Sa ulo, hindi sa paa, hindi sa kamay, hindi sa binti, sa ulo, as close to our brains as possible, as a way of being reminded. Keep this in your head. We are but dust and ashes. Wala tayong dapat ipagmalaki o ipagyabang sa mundo. We have nothing to boast or to be arrogant about. Tayo'y alikabok. When God reclaims the breath of life that He has breathed upon us, we who have been created from the dust of the earth will return to dust. Like everything else around us, including our bodies, and all the material things that we may have accumulated, wala naman tayong bibit-bitin sa hukay. All the money, all the power, and all the fame will be reduced to ashes. We will all end up as dust and ashes. This is the statement that we are making once again as we enter into the season of Lent. But it can become a meaningless statement. It becomes meaningful only if we learn to strip ourselves of any kind of boastfulness or arrogance or haughtiness. Ang naririnig ko sa ebanghelyo natin ngayon is an echo of the prophet Isaiah. Once upon a time, 800 years before Christ, a prophet called Isaiah already asked the same questions about fasting. How this meaningful ritual can easily become meaningless when we fail to do it properly. Listen to how the prophet verbalizes the lament of Israel. This is in chapter 58 of Isaiah, verses 1 to 12. Ito yung hidaing niya sa Diyos. Why do we fast, Lord, and you do not see it? Bakit kami nag-aayuno at hindi mo kami pinapansin? Why do we afflict ourselves and you do not take note of it? Bakit kami nagpepenitensya at parang wala lang sa'yo? Actually, this question should be coming from us as we continue to go through this seemingly endless pandemic. Ito na marahil ang pinakamahabang Kwaresma na ating naranasan. Probably the longest Lent that we have ever experienced. It started 339 days ago. On March 15, 2020, the first time we experienced a lockdown. And the whole nation was put under quarantine. I wonder if the Lord has decided to put another 0 to 40. Kasi 40 lang ang Kwaresma. 40 lang yung quarantena. Dinagdagan yata niya ng isa pang 0. Kaya ang title ng homily ko, 400 Days of Lent? Question mark. We're not even sure if we will see an end to it after another 61 more days. Wala pa nga daw kasiguraduhan kahit sa bakuna. I am not asking, I am lamenting. Like the prophet Isaiah, I am tempted to pray and ask, Lord, why do we fast and you do not seem to see it? Bakit kami nag-aayuno at hindi mo kami pinapansin? We have been praying our Oratio Imperata for the past 339 days now. And we are still praying it. But the prophet has a quick response to Israel's lament, which is becoming our lament. Ito daw ang sagot ng Diyos. Is this the manner of fasting that I wish? Ito ba ang uri ng pag-aayuno na ibig ko? That you bow your head like a reed and lie in sackcloth and ashes? Is this what you call fasting? A day acceptable to the Lord? And then the prophet declares in the name of God. He says, this rather is the kind of fasting that I wish, releasing those who are detained unjustly, untying their yokes and setting them free. I wonder how many people are unjustly detained in our country today. I never thought before that our indifference to their suffering can indefinitely prolong our Lent and make our rituals of penance meaningless. That our cries to heaven bounce back to us when we ourselves are unable to hear the cries of the widows and the orphans. Today is February 17, 2021. And it was exactly on this day, February 17, 2017, that a local court pressed drug-related charges against one lady senator. Kilala niyo siya. That's 4 years ago now. And the charges against her remain unproven. But she continues to suffer detention. If this kind of injustice can be done to a duly elected legislator of our country, I wonder what it is like for ordinary people who have also been unjustly detained for non-bailable charges. People who cannot afford a lawyer, who continue to suffer away from their loved ones who need them. If we cannot hear their cries, how do we expect God to hear our cries? We can at least offer our Lenten fast for them. Let us fast for them. Perchance the Lord will put an end to our own quarantine and not multiply 400 days to another 400 days. Or yet another 400 days, 1,200 days. Pagod na tayo sa loob ng Noah's Ark. Ang mga buhay natin hanggang ngayon, lulutang-lutang. We are all waiting for a rainbow. For the day God will declare an end to this pandemic. I am also thinking of the people of Myanmar and another courageous lady named Aung San Suu Kyi and the countless Burmese people who have been unjustly detained for no other reason than they had won in the recent election. And the military could not accept their defeats. Umulit na naman ang kasaysayan para sa kanila. This had happened a long time ago. And people were hoping that spaces of democracy have already been opened. The moment the military allowed the civilians to share in governance. But recently, it is the people of Myanmar who have made a statement. They want civilian authority over the military. And they feel that the military have no business in governance. Natalo sila. They could not accept their defeat. They jailed those who won and those who refuse military government. Let us thank God that we are not there. I think also of the beloved Archbishop of Yangon, Charles Cardinal Bow. He came to our country as the papal legate during the last Eucharistic Congress in Cebu. A very gentle man. He is like a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for an end to conflict in his beloved country, and has a country that has known conflict far too long. If we think our quarantine has lasted for 339 days, theirs have lasted, 2 decades already. I also invite you, brothers and sisters, to include them in our Lenten fasting and penance. I think of the displaced people around the world, people who have become homeless because they flee from places of conflict and wars. I think of people who suffer from exclusion because of racial, ethnic, religious, political, economic, or any form of intolerance. Their cries must reach us first if we want our own cries to reach the heavenly throne. Bakit pakikinggan ng Diyos ang ating mga hinaing kung di natin pinakikinggan ang hinaing ng ating mga kapwa? I think of the countless people who have suffered because of this pandemic, and those among them who have died alone, whose families have not even had the chance to grieve their loss together. I think of their loved ones and how poignantly the ashes of Ash Wednesday must speak to them now as they try to hold on to the ashes of their beloved departed ones who have died during this pandemic. Hindi na pareho ang magiging kahulugan ng abo sa mga nawalan ng kaanak sa pandemyang ito na mabilis naging abo. I think of those who have lost their jobs, those who have lost their businesses and their means of livelihood. I think of those who are hungry and those who cannot pay their rent and have to become homeless. If we are to include them in our Lenten fasting, we must listen very well to the words of the prophet. And let me continue reading the words of this prophet. He speaks for God. Again, he says, God says, ito yung pag-aayunong ibig ko. This is the fasting that I want. That you share your bread with the hungry, that you shelter the oppressed and the homeless, that you clothe the naked when you see them, and that you do not turn your back on your neighbors. And the exhortation comes with a promised reward. He says, it is only then that your own cries will reach the ears of God. He says, then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your wound shall quickly be healed. Your vindication shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and God will say, here I am. If you remove from your midst oppression, false accusation, and malicious speech, if you learn to break bread with the hungry and satisfy the afflicted, Then light shall rise for you in the darkness, and the gloom shall become for you like the midday.